Welcome to Sib Spot. Today's Reddit stories are from MaliciousCompliance. Story 1 is by Cocky Nurse. Oh, this isn't my yard? All this is your yard? Guys, this is a really long one, but it's a good one. My wife and I bought our first home in early 2021 at the perfect time. Our house is in an older neighborhood, but it is a new build. Prior to the house being built, it was just a plot of land that was overgrown with trees and bushes. We bought our house and the backyard needed work. There was about 100 feet deep of backyard we could play with, but that was all due to some overgrowth of vines, bushes, small trees, bamboo, you name it. To give some context, our plot of land is shaped like a parallelogram. It doesn't just go straight like a rectangle. Our yard is sort of angled. My wife and I worked hard to start clearing it out. It turns out we still had about 25 feet deep of backyard to play with once all the crap was removed. We started out in the center and cleared it out and then started working on the sides of the overgrowth. We got to the neighbor to our left and found our survey stake, so we stopped there. We started on the other side, and after a few days of working on it, we come to the outside to a patchwork fence from our neighbor to the right. This fence was just tree limbs and things stabbed into the ground. We still had a good 15 feet or so to reach our other stake, but seeing as though we hadn't met or talked to these neighbors yet, we decided to stop there for now, since it was getting colder out and we didn't want to step on the new neighbor's toes. Fast forward a few months and it's springtime. That patchwork fence had long fallen down and limbs and things had been removed. So I start mowing the lawn, and I mow from my front stake diagonally to where my back stake is, which I'm able to see pretty clearly through the overgrowth. I start cutting the overgrowth and I get through most of it that day. I make a huge pile in the backyard, and the company came out the next day to remove the brush with 4 truckloads. Geez, that's a lot. The next week I go out to cut my grass and I see that there's rocks and sticks laid down way into my yard about halfway down, and it goes all the way back to where the original patchwork fence was. I'm curious as to why my neighbor would put them there, so I started doing some research. I pulled out our survey from when the house was being built and started walking our property line. From our front marker to our back marker matched. So I walked between the back left marker to the back right marker. It also matched. Our survey said 115 feet of length between survey pins. I used both a really long tape measure and one of those walking measurers and got plus or minus 3 feet of 115 feet. So I knew we were right on the spot. Of note, I had also tried introducing myself to the neighbors, and the husband was quiet but nice, and the wife just ignored us. No waves, no smiles, nothing. So I move the rocks to the back of my yard and throw the sticks in the yard waste bin. I finish cutting the grass and start working on spraying the little root systems from the brush I had removed the week prior. All of a sudden, our male neighbor comes outside and walks towards me. He says that, "Hey, just so you know, you removed our privacy plants that help conceal us from the people behind us. Not sure if you thought your yard extended this far or what, but this is all our yard." I tell him that, well, our survey shows that the distance between these 2 pins in the back should be 115 feet, which is what I got when I measured them. Also, from measuring from the front pins to the bottom pins, both those numbers were about right as well. So everything is matching up on our survey. He says, "Well, my wife works for the city and they can see exactly where the plots are, and my plot goes to here," while pointing like 15 feet into my yard. I tell him that we can split the cost of a survey if he wants, and he's not interested and goes inside. I keep doing my thing in my yard, and 2 weeks pass by and I go out to cut the grass again. There are now bricks, rocks, more limbs, yard spray paint, and flags 15 feet into my yard. I'm now really irritated. I knock on the door with no answer despite them both being home. I know this because I could see them through the window when cutting grass. I also saw that they were live viewing me on the Ring. I move what I can and finish cutting the grass. I go to Lowe's and pick up some string and run string from my front stake to my back stake. Next week it's cut, laying way inside my yard. When he was getting into his car later that evening, I asked why they cut my string. My mower must have ran over it. I tell him that it's strange his mower ran over it and it ended up in my yard where he says my yard ends. I then tell him that my survey is new and more likely to be right, than whatever system his wife is using to determine plots. He tells me, "Well, then I guess you're going to have to pay to get a new survey done." Okay, I will. I got many quotes, and the two lowest I got were $550 and $980. The highest I got was $4,400. The $550 was from the company who did the original survey before the house was built. Not sure why the price was so vastly different for the same service, but whatever. I pay the $550 and have the survey done. They put up a total of 15 stakes down that side of my property line. The kicker? I was wrong. My yard didn't go to where I thought it did. Instead, it went further into their yard by as much as 4 feet in some places. I was confused and asked the surveyor to explain. Apparently, there used to be an old rock feature between our houses that was mostly on my neighbor's plot, but some was on an empty plot where my house was built. My neighbors didn't want to deal with the hassle of trying to tear down and rebuild certain spots, so the builder paid him for the land the rock wall sat on, plus about a foot into their yard, and the builder removed the rock wall. I had the pins down and was worried they'd try to mess with them again, so I bought some outdoor cameras and pointed them at my property line. We went on vacation, and when we came back, yep, the stakes were gone. I leave another note because they don't answer and explain what they did was illegal and how we needed to talk about it, and left my number. I watch the video and see his wife taking up all the stakes. I don't hear anything for a few days, so I ended up speaking with the husband while he was about to go for a run. He claims he never got any note and he didn't know anything about any stakes. I tell him I have his wife on video removing the stakes. He says he will talk to her. I get a text that night apologizing and saying they won't remove the stakes again. What happened to not getting my note that had my number? Oh, I can't stand liars. I'm like, no, you won't remove the stakes again, but you will be paying for another survey. He says that they didn't know it was done by an actual surveyor. I tell him it doesn't matter. We go back and forth before he eventually concedes after I threaten small claims and police. I call the original surveyors and explain the situation. Well, we don't want to do a job that has potential criminal implications like this, so we won't do it again. I call the next lowest quote that I got. They were now able to do it for $900. I say, let me get back to you and let my neighbors know. He's fuming, saying no way that it's right, a survey doesn't cost that much, blah, blah, blah. I tell him he's free to get his own quote for that side of the yard and give him 5 companies I tried, not the original since they didn't want to be involved. A week passes and I ask him what quote he ended up getting that was the cheapest, and he says it was the $900, but he wouldn't be paying it. I tell him, okay, pay the $500 fine, get a misdemeanor, and we'll go to small claims court, and you'll still end up owing me since I have it on video and via text. The next day I am handed $900 all in $10 and $5 bills, and he walked off. The $900 quote ended up going back up to about $1,000 since he waited too long and they had too many bookings. I called the original company and told them, hey, we settled our differences, he paid me for the cost of the survey, and I'm just going to get another one done. Could you come and do it? And they came out and did it, for the same $550. I now have a fence and trees lining both sides of my yard and believe the neighbors are moving out soon, based on the furniture I see them taking out. I've never had the displeasure of living right next to somebody who's a problem neighbor. I've heard stories from other neighbors about people in the area that do bad things. Luckily, have never had really bad neighbors, just noisy ones here and there. Used to live next to somebody that liked to ride snowmobiles up and down the street at like 2 a.m. in the winter time, and 4-wheelers up and down the street every other time of the year when it's dry. Our next story is by Maybe I'm Okay. No one's stuff can be left lying around? You got it. This happened a few years ago when I, 22 female, was 18 and still living at home. My mother, who was 65 then, was and still is a raging narcissist and a control freak. In a way, I can't really blame her since she grew up practically looking after her siblings, but it's something that slowly destroyed our family life. I was diagnosed with high-level ADHD when I was 19, which explained a lot of difficulties growing up. But this is the backstory to why my mother is terrified of me touching her stuff. My mother had this hatred for things not being done her way, to the point where she would go through her friends' and family's trash to rip up posts or mail about stuff with names on it, because people will find your address if they look through the bins. If they're looking through my bins, they're already outside my house, so I don't think they need the address, to be frank. But she would move everything out of mine, put it away in places it doesn't belong, shove it in bags, goes into my room to try to tidy it, and I lose things, break things, don't have enough clothes out, etc. It was endless, and I was growing angry. My father is an enabler, so he would always defend her when he knew she was wrong. What tipped the scale was a seemingly normal day. When I cook, I usually clean a little as I go along, but I do the bulk after I finish eating. Every single time, without fail, as soon as my butt touched the chair to eat, she'd be in the kitchen screaming about how it's so dirty and no one does anything in this house, and then she'd be there smashing pots and making noises of anger. We've all gotten used to just tuning her out, mostly. When I take a shower, I always dry myself, head up to my room telling them the bathrooms are free, but not clean, and then get into new clothes. Quickly blow dry my hair and then moisturize my face and head down to clean up the bathroom. Screaming, shouting, compares herself to a slave, no one respects her house, etc., etc. Every single time, she wouldn't even need the bathroom, she'd just enter it to complain. This time, however, she brandished my shampoo bottle in my face and screamed about how if I didn't put things back fast enough, I was in my room maybe 10 minutes, then she'd kick me out because she was fed up of tidying everyone else's stuff up. No one asked her to. After she's been on her feet all day at work, she logs books on a computer, plus she refused to retire. Cue malicious compliance. For 4 long weeks, I put everything away, and I mean everything. Everyone else's stuff got put away or put on their placemat. I moved things around to their proper places. I put things away she was mid-using. Work stuff she left lying around got put back into her pile of papers. Her clothes dumped outside her room. Blankets folded and stacked when she went to the toilet. Spices and foods back on the top shelf. My mother is around 5'2", so she struggles to reach things sometimes, where I'm 5'9", so I can easily pop things out of her reach. Bottles, jewelry, glasses, pots, pans, everything was put away. For some reason I loved it. It seemed to scratch an itch in my brain whenever I got bursts of motivation to do it. It took a month before she basically told me to F off doing it. She'd lost multiple things, kept having to call for help reaching stuff, sort through her papers to ask me why I moved things. All I said to her was, "Do you see how annoying it is now?" and closed my bedroom door. I moved everything back the next day. When she was at work for maybe 1 blissful week, she stopped nagging. Didn't last long, but I always remember it with a smile. Yes, she's your mother. Yes, mothers tend to have issues with people not doing enough around the house. But that's pretty standard. Nobody likes to be a slave for other people, but if she's putting all your stuff away and tidying your room and making you lose stuff and breaking things in your room accidentally, it's only fair that you do the same to her. I would say it was deserved. Our last story is by Co-Real. Car dealer tried to rip me off, ended up having to pay inflated maintenance bills themselves. Not a native speaker or writer. This happened about 17 years ago in a major city in the very south of the Netherlands with a Renault dealership. I had a new job and we needed a second car. We bought a new Twingo, a car that went for about 12,000 euros. There were 2 stipulations in the contract when we bought the car. Number 1 was that we had to get financing through Renault. And number 2 was that 3 years maintenance was included. We financed a minor part for 3 years at 0% interest. After the first year, I took the car for its first service. It had about 12,000 kilometers on the odometer. When I dropped the car off, I was asked if there was anything that needed attention. I think I answered something like, "Do whatever you need to." In the late afternoon, when I picked up the car, 3 rather bulky men were standing behind the service desk. I remember they were really focused on me when I was presented with the bill. The bill was for about 1,000 euros, and for a 1-year-old car with about 12,000 kilometers, I immediately understood what had happened. They must have figured they could inflate the bill with all kinds of nonsense maintenance actions since I gave them carte blanche, and to avoid any troubles they made sure I could be intimidated by them being with 3 people. I just asked in a very friendly way for my car key. But you have to pay first. No, I don't. Please, may I have my car keys? Instead of enlightening them straight away, I kept going like this for a bit longer. When things started to get a bit unfriendly, I reminded the rep that I had bought the car at this dealership, including 3 years of maintenance. All 3 guys turned a few shades lighter, frantically searching for the contract, whispering, moving to the office out of earshot. It took about 10 minutes before the rep came back out and handed me my keys. I ended up getting its 3rd service just before the 3 years had elapsed, and as soon as I got the title to the car, I traded it in for a car of a different brand. As you would expect, the bill for the 2nd and 3rd service was less than 300 to 400 euros. Not sure if this is the right Reddit. The compliance part is that they did everything they were supposed to do and way more, and I complied as well by reminding them that they were responsible for all costs. People too frequently get screwed over by car dealerships. So I'm quite glad to see that you didn't let it happen, OP. Nicely done. Our stories for today have come to a close. Until we meet again, have an amazing day.